Baseball analyst Doug Glanville joins us now here on SportsCenter, and I realized that with the NBA and the WNBA, there were less games scheduled on Wednesday, just 3 in each of those leagues, and all of those games were postponed, where Major League Baseball had plenty more games on the schedule. But what do you make of some games being played and some games not being played, or even some players choosing not to play, but the Rockies played, Matt Kemp's not going to play, but the team decided to go ahead and play?
Well, you know, that's the challenge Major League Baseball has had, just trying to figure out how they're going to proceed in this sort of unified way, and also respecting each team's sort of sovereignty in a certain respect. And sometimes that could make sense, and there's times you're trying to figure out that clearly humanity is central to this, and that's something that everyone can get on board, and they can send that message more collectively. They'll probably think through this and try to figure out the next steps to figure out how to expand on it, or whatever they want to do in light of this, or at least as a result of this. And Major League Baseball has, certainly made attempts early on in the season. We saw the symbolism in the opening day with kneeling and Black Lives Matter, and now it's the actionable items that they're going to look to, and they want to make sure whatever choice they make, it's actually something that they can sustain and really make formative change.
Doug, you've been around baseball longer than I have, and you realize as well as I do, though, that traditionally baseball has been a very conservative sport and a very conservative ownership group, especially when you compare it to the NBA. WNBA is not even a conversation. But now they are in this position where they are listening to their players, and they're putting these things in stadiums like Justice Equality Now. What impact do you think baseball can have in this regard and should have in this regard, considering the makeup of their teams?
Well, it's significant because you're talking about a different kind of diversity when you compare the demographics, say, of NBA or NFL. Talking about players that are international, Latin America, from Asia, all over the world, and also the diversity within the American players. So within that, you recognize that speaking on these issues and coalescing around it is symbolic and significant, because players are saying, although this may be not my identity and I may not be the aggrieved group directly, I still see you as my brother and I'm standing by you. That's a powerful message when you're not necessarily directly affected, but you can empathize and you can take steps and stands to be able to have their back, which I think makes creates great potential for Major League Baseball to have a unique position in this discussion and actually forge change that comes from a kaleidoscope of people.
This is a sports show, and we're trying to have these conversations in the framework of sports. But the fact of the matter is, if these issues weren't happening in the community, these players wouldn't be taking these positions and these protests to the level that they have. So let me ask you this question. You have firsthand knowledge and experience in terms of working in the community with policing and police reform. From your experience and other people that you've talked to, what confidence did you have, Doug, that this thing can change quickly enough that we're not talking about this on SportsCenter anytime soon?
Well, it's a slow process, and you need both. You need the sort of in-your-face, symbolic recognition that this needs to stop, but you also need that slow work in the back burner, in the courtrooms and legislation that is also working in tandem. I think that's the challenge of connecting those dots, of saying we want to take a stand, but then we want the change to continue on. And that work is often slow behind the scenes. For example, I work on the Connecticut Police Officers Standard and Training. Now, these councils exist in every state in America, but some don't have civilians on them. Some are just law enforcement. It's a very different look depending on your state. Well, I think, for example, you could say, I'd like to advocate to have civilians on all these boards, representative of people on the ground, to have that dialogue with law enforcement in the room that set the standards for training, set the standards for discipline or certification or decertification. So those are concrete examples. Now, that could happen simultaneously while you're also symbolically bringing the country around the issue to recognize this is what's happening, and we have now video to support it. It's like instant replay. You see it now, and you have context. And that's something that did not exist in policing, for example, in recent times.
So with that said, let me pose a question that I posed to Stephen A. Smith a little bit earlier. It's one thing for the players involved, but oftentimes the most powerful people in these sports are the owners of these respective teams. What impact do you think it would have locally if the owners of Major League Baseball were talking to governors, mayors, police union presidents to try to help these things get done faster based on what these players have done?
A huge impact, absolutely. The power that's there, and they already are engaging in legislative processes already, whether it's stadium financing or there's always an aspect that they're at.
They have those connections.
They're at the table already. So now it's figuring out how to pivot to something that is significant, sustainable, unifying, and doing that work. But this is not uncharted territory when it talks about engagement. And these teams are iconic. They're representative of their communities. There's a respect. And I believe strongly that the alignment also is powerful when the Brewers and the Bucks, and you have all these teams within your community saying, wait, this is so much bigger than our sport. And sometimes sports gets compartmentalized because our baseball is different than basketball, and we understand there's different demographics, but at the same time, we're centering this around humanity. That is much more powerful in that form.
I've always said sports is the most unifying aspect of our society. It would be great if we could use that sport unity to bring forth this change and make our respective communities greater in unity. Doug Glanville, always smarter when I talk to you, brother. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Appreciate it.